Welcome to Storycraft Portal, where we share the most gripping and emotional stories that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Today's story is one of raw courage and survival, where a woman, pushed to the brink of death by her violent ex-boyfriend, found the strength to testify against him and change her life forever. This is not just a story of physical survival, but of emotional and mental strength in the face of unimaginable terror. The twists and turns in this tale will shock you, and by the end, you'll be left wondering how far you'd go to protect yourself and seek justice. Are you ready? Let's dive in. Lucy's world had been a blur of love and fear, a constant cycle of hope and disappointment. Ethan, her ex-boyfriend, had once been her protector, the man she thought she'd spend her life with. But over time, something changed. The loving words he once spoke turned into cruel insults. The gentle touch turned into violent pushes. She had lived in a world of manipulation, gaslighting, and threats, too afraid to leave him. One night, as the tension in their relationship reached a boiling point, Ethan snapped. Lucy, desperate for escape, found herself locked in a battle for survival. She had never expected this, never thought he could do something so monstrous. She had been living with the idea that things would get better. But this night, something shifted in her. Would she survive? Would she have the strength to fight back? Or was she already too broken to stand up? The night that would change Lucy's life forever had started like any other. She had tried to calm Ethan down, as she had countless times before, but tonight his anger was different. He wasn't listening to her anymore. His eyes were wild with rage, and the words that came out of his mouth were venomous. "You think you can leave me?" he yelled as he grabbed her arm tightly. "You'll regret this." His grip tightened, and fear began to crawl under Lucy's skin. As the minutes dragged on, she felt the walls closing in. Ethan had always been unpredictable, but tonight there was something in his expression that told her this was going too far. It was like he was no longer the person she had once loved. She couldn't breathe. Desperation filled her chest. Her heart raced as she realized she had to escape. But would she be able to? The sound of a door slamming echoed through the apartment, and Lucy's heart skipped a beat. She had been able to break free just for a moment, but in the chaos, she had made a deadly mistake. Ethan was quicker than she had anticipated. Before she could fully reach the hallway, he was behind her, pushing her back into the room. His voice was low and threatening now, filled with malice. "You think you can leave me? No one leaves me." He grabbed her by the hair and dragged her back into the center of the room. Fear flooded Lucy's senses. This was not the man she once knew. This was a stranger, a monster. She could feel the darkness closing in on her. But in the midst of the terror, a single thought pierced her mind. "I need to survive." Lucy fought with everything she had left, each movement slower than the last as Ethan's grip tightened. Her vision blurred, and her head throbbed from the blows. She had never felt so powerless in her life. Yet, deep down, something inside of her refused to give in. She couldn't let him win. In the chaos, Lucy spotted the kitchen knife that had fallen to the ground during the struggle. It was her only chance. She had to act fast. With a trembling hand, she grabbed the knife, holding it in front of her like a shield. She didn't want to hurt him, but she knew she had no choice. Ethan took a step closer, and in that moment, she fought back with every ounce of strength she had left. The knife glinted in the dim light as she thrust it towards him, the terror in her eyes now matched by the desperate resolve in her heart. Blood was everywhere. Lucy's heart raced as she watched Ethan stagger backward, his eyes wide with disbelief and rage. She had never meant for it to go this far. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she tried to process what had just happened. Ethan was still alive, but his anger had momentarily shifted to fear. He was no longer the man she had once known. He was a stranger now, someone capable of unspeakable violence. Lucy didn't wait. She ran, her body aching and bruised, but she ran. The streets outside felt like a world away, but it was where she felt she might finally be safe. She had survived the attack, but the battle was far from over. She knew Ethan would come for her, but this time she was ready. The fight for her life was just beginning, and she wasn't going to let him destroy her anymore. Lucy knew she couldn't run forever. The city was vast, but Ethan was relentless. After making sure she was safe in a temporary shelter, she could hear her own thoughts echoing in the silence. It was as though the world was telling her to keep moving, to never look back. But the memories wouldn't let her forget. The blood, the fear, the suffocating terror of that night. They were seared into her mind. Yet, in the midst of it all, a sense of clarity began to form. This was no longer just about surviving Ethan's violence. It was about reclaiming her life, about finding the strength to stand up for herself, to face him in court and make him pay for what he had done. But would the justice system listen to her? Would they believe her? Or would Ethan's manipulations control the narrative? Lucy couldn't stay in hiding forever. The fear of being found by Ethan never left her, but the urgency to seek justice pushed her forward. She contacted a lawyer who specialized in domestic violence cases. The initial meeting was overwhelming. So many legal terms, so many questions that brought back painful memories. But there was no turning back. She was determined to make sure Ethan never hurt anyone again. The process was grueling. Each day felt like an emotional battle as she relived every horrifying detail of that night. Ethan, however, had his own story to tell. His manipulations began, trying to paint her as the instigator, the aggressor. He tried to turn her pain into his defense. But Lucy knew she couldn't let him win. She couldn't let his lies control her anymore. As the trial date approached, Lucy felt the pressure mounting. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every woman who had ever suffered in silence, for every person who had been too afraid to speak out. The courtroom became her battleground, and the air was thick with tension. Ethan's lawyer tried to poke holes in her story, undermining her credibility at every turn. But Lucy stood firm. She would not let him strip her of her voice. Each time she took the stand, she relived the trauma, but with each testimony, her confidence grew. The pain of the past seemed to melt away with every word of truth she spoke. Still, doubt lingered in the back of her mind. Would the jury believe her? Would they side with the manipulative man who had hurt her for so long? The trial had been a roller coaster of emotions. Lucy felt exposed, vulnerable, but more than anything, she felt a sense of responsibility. This was her chance to stop Ethan from hurting anyone else. As the days passed, the jury began to lean toward her side. Witnesses were brought in to testify about Ethan's violent tendencies, and pieces of his past were revealed, showing a pattern of abuse that spanned years. Slowly but surely, the walls that had once protected him began to crumble. But the hardest moment came when Lucy had to face Ethan in court once again. His smug smile, his attempts to intimidate her with his gaze, it all felt like a reminder of how much he had tried to break her. But Lucy refused to be broken. This time, she was the one in control. She was no longer afraid. The jury's verdict was announced, and the room held its breath. Lucy had been through so much, and now it all came down to this final moment. Ethan was found guilty on all charges. The weight of the words hit Lucy like a tidal wave. It was over. The man who had terrorized her for so long was finally held accountable for his actions. As she left the courtroom, she felt a sense of relief she never thought possible. She was no longer a victim. She was a survivor. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. Healing would take time, but she was free. Free from the fear, free from the violence, and free from the past. She had fought for her life, and she had won. The case was closed, but Lucy's journey was just beginning.